Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. So glad to see you all in our audience. A lot of returning viewers, and I see some new viewers. So welcome to all of you from near and from far. I see Becky from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Mary Jo from New Jersey. Let's see, we have Pamela from Illinois, Stephanie from Australia. We have viewers from Sweden, from Oklahoma, Saskatchewan, all over. I see Renee here from the UK. So thank you all for joining us. So great to see where you are all from, where you're watching from today. We love having you all here in our audience. For those of you that are new to our Facebook Lives, we have been doing these Facebook Lives for a while now with experts across the industry in DNA, genealogy, family history, and we have touched upon so many different topics. So if you've missed any of them and you want to go and rewatch any of our sessions that we've done in the past, you can do so on the MyHeritage Facebook page under the videos section, as well as rewatching today's session. If you watch some of it and you miss a part, or you just want to rewatch any of it, you can do so afterwards on the MyHeritage Facebook page under the videos section. So we hope that you'll do so and check out all the amazing content that we have there for you from experts on various different topics, MyHeritage or genealogy in general. Today we have a very exciting session for you. Before we get to it, I'm just going to tell you about a few things that we have going on here at MyHeritage. So the first exciting thing is the Deep Nostalgia Challenge. We recently released a feature called Deep Nostalgia, and it's a feature which allows you to take photos, old photos of ancestors or family members, and to animate them, and it can make their faces move a little bit thanks to artificial intelligence and very advanced technology. It's a great feature that has just brought forth so many reactions and emotions from users all over the world that are just so excited to be using it and to see their loved ones move and look at them. So a very, very exciting feature. And I'm going to try and show a little promo video. Let's see if it works. We'll try it now and see if you guys can see this. Let us know if there's any problems watching the video in the comments section. So hopefully you were able to see that, just a little promo for our Deep Nostalgia, very, very exciting feature. And so what we're asking you all to do is to share your animated photos with us and the stories behind them. Some of the best animations that we've seen are people that have taken photos of their loved ones and animated them and told us about the characters behind the photos. And we just love reading about it and what it means to them. So we're asking you all to share with us your animated photos, and it could be on a social media channel, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Share with us on a social media channel using the hashtag Deep Nostalgia Challenge, and we will be giving away 5 complete plans on MyHeritage. This is the best plan that we have to offer. Very, very exciting, a great opportunity for everyone. So please share your animations with us, and we'd love to hear about the people in your photos and what they mean to you. So please, I see a comment here already from Marco, and he says, talking about deep nostalgia, I have to thank you because it moved my aunt to tears, seeing her beloved grandmother who raised her up as her own child. Seeing her crying touched me deeply. What a nice story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Marco. And, just seeing the reactions flood in from users all over the world has been so meaningful for us at MyHeritage. So continue sharing those stories and those animations, and we hope to see your entries. And we put a link in the comment section there of some more details about the contest if you want to read more, so you can check it out. The second thing that I have to tell you all about is the free access to Irish records on MyHeritage. This is until tomorrow, including tomorrow. Free access to all Irish records at MyHeritage. You can use the link myheritage.com/Irish-records. We'll be putting a link to that as well in the comment section so you could learn more. So please take advantage of that in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which is today. So we hope that you're able to find some information there about your Irish roots if you have them. Which brings me to our talk today. So today we have with us James Tanner, and he is an expert genealogist who has come to our Facebook Lives in the past, and it's always a pleasure to have him here. Obviously, a fantastic speaker about all things genealogy. So let me bring him up on the screen so he can say hello to us. And he'll be talking today about Irish records and researching your Irish heritage. So no better time than on St. Patrick's Day, right, James?
Right. Good to see everybody today. Quite an interesting experience to be able to talk to people around the world, and especially when you're sitting in Provo, Utah, which is a pretty small town in the United States. So it's kind of a really interesting experience. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things, just to read where everyone is joining from in the comment section.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Love to talk about Irish. I've got Irish ancestors, and spent a lot of time doing research in Ireland. So it's an interesting place.
Fantastic. Well, we're really looking forward to it, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, great. So should I bring up your slides?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Let's do it. There we go.
We ready to go?
Yeah, all set.
Okay, I'm glad to have everybody here. I'm going to talk about diving into my Irish heritage. Well, you'll be able to learn how to dive into your Irish heritage, hopefully get some pointers and some information about it. When we start out with almost any country, in any place in any country, we really need to emphasize, as genealogists emphasize, that the history of the country and genealogy and history are really the same thing. Genealogy is just a very focused part of history. But in order to understand, particularly in a country that you do not live in, it is very important to know some of the history. You don't need to become an expert on the history, but it would help, as a matter of fact. The more history you know, the more it is likely that you will have the understanding of where and how to find the records that have been created in that particular country. And there is certainly a very good reason for learning at least basic Irish history, so that you can understand what happened to the people and why some of your ancestors, if you live in a country where Irish people emigrated to and became immigrants in your country, then you need to know why, perhaps, and what period of time that they left Ireland and why they might have left Ireland, and what happened to them when they got to the country. Here in the United States, Irish immigrants were not welcomed for many, many years. They were discriminated against and had a very difficult time in making a way in the United States. So there's quite a bit of history on both sides of the country of arrival as well as the country of departure. And you can find this Irish history. It's quite easy, as a matter of fact. There are books, lots of books, and websites and videos. If you have access to a public library, you probably find some books on Irish history. And also there are a number of websites dedicated to Irish history and various aspects and Irish genealogy. And a lot of YouTube videos, as by the way, on Irish history. So there's a good way to, a lot of good ways to learn about what happened in Ireland. So I'm going to go back. Obviously, Irish history goes back into prehistoric times, but we're going to go back to about the time that some of the records, there are records that do go back before 1600, but we're kind of focus on this area because this is where a lot of the I would call it complications start to occur in what was happening in Ireland. One of the things that happened here is the plantations in a place called Ulster. Ulster is a part of Ireland, and I'll go a little bit more into that and get so you can understand what we're talking about here. But the idea here was that about actually in the 1500s, the English in Great Britain began their expansion into, which ultimately ended up in the British Empire. But they began in earnest to try to expand into Ireland. And one of the things that they did when they entered into Ireland is they started what was called the Plantation System. And the Plantation System was, it's kind of an innocuous name for a very serious problem and for the Irish, and that is that the British English would come in, the landowners, and they would buy up all the land or just take the land by force and move all of the native Irish off of the land. And so the native Irish were driven off of the land into the mountains and primarily into the southern part of the Irish island of Ireland. And they set up what are called plantation systems, meaning they imported workers from other countries. And the countries they mainly imported their workers from were from Scotland and from England. And so you get a group of people who they call Scots-Irish, and the Scotch-Irish people were brought into Ireland and basically became tenant farmers to the landowners. They did not own property. They were, there is a term that we use for that, and they would be called serf. They were people who did not own, and they worked the land at the basically under the direction of the landowner, the people, the managers who were appointed by the landowners to run the property in Ireland. So this is one area where there has been a lot of conflict. And if we flash forward to the present, which I do show you in stages, but just so you can see where we're going with this, is that we now have two separate countries on the Irish, on the island, and that is Northern Ireland, which is presently part of Great Britain, and we have, or the United Kingdom, and we have the Irish Free State, the Ireland, Free Ireland, and they're both there. So understanding Irish records is they're not necessarily uniform. They may be for many years. So let's see what happened. So the landlords moved out the indigenous population. Oh, and there was and they brought in the people they brought in, and I failed to mention this. They were called undertakers. Now, the term undertaker in the United States has taken on a completely different, but probably related meaning. The undertakers here are the people who are the morticians who bury the dead, are called the undertakers. But they were called undertakers, the English rulers who were employed by the landowners to manage the English and Scottish population that came into Ireland. So basically, if you have an Irish ancestor who was born and lived in Ireland, their ancestry could come from England or from Scotland or from Ireland. So there's quite a bit of overlap there. And I want to point out with this slide that there are full documents and collections of the documents beginning in 1600. This is one example. It's NI Direct Government Services has put out this Plantations in Ulster 1600 to 41 with copies of documents. And it becomes important to understand that every document that you can find here in Ireland is important. It's important because it may fill in some part of the puzzle that you have in finding and locating your ancestors in the country. And I have the links here. We will put this, as Esther mentioned, we will have these videos will be up on the Facebook page under the videos tab. And so you can stop the video and copy out these links if you wish to do so. Now this is a website called Scots in Ulster, and it specifically addresses the issue and the history and some of the people who were involved in this process of forming these plantations and the undertakers. So these Scottish undertakers. So if you are interested and if you discover that your ancestors came from Northern Ireland, you may want to get into this history and begin to understand how this particular events, how all of these events occurred. And here's this website dedicated to the Scots in Ulster. Actually, my ancestors did come from Northern Ireland, and they were Scots. And so my own ancestors were part of this process. Although I don't think they were the undertakers, I think they were the workers, because most of them were extremely poor. Okay, so here's an explanation of Ulster. Ulster is, Ireland was traditionally divided into 4 provinces: Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connacht, or Connaught. And the stir suffix is the Irish word for stair, and it means province. And so in 1921, when it was split into 2 different states or 2 different countries, 6 of the 9 counties of Ulster became Northern Ireland, and 3, Donegal, Cavan, and Monaghan, stayed in the Irish, what was called the Irish Free State. So there's 23 other counties down there. And it's important to know this because the record sets that you get for genealogical research are going to be in different places during the times that England had control of the country, or when the country was split into Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State. Ulster is used as a kind of a term by the people who would like to unify Ireland. So it's often referred to as Ulster, even though that doesn't particularly apply today as far as any kind of a political division in the nation, other than the split between Northern and Ireland. Just important to understand that Ireland was more or less, and I use that term because there was constant warfare between the native indigenous Irish people and the English. And so they were fighting back and forth, and depending, and this is where there's very complex history of battles back and forth, and who controlled which counties during which period of time, and who prevailed in a certain battle that the English were driven back to part of the country right around Dublin for a period of time, and then they took the country back. And so it went back and forth for many, many years, for hundreds of years. There was warfare. And this is one of the base reasons why there is somewhat of a challenge of doing genealogy in Ireland, is because of this constant warfare. And just important to understand that the Irish Free State became free in 1922, but didn't become fully independent until 1937, and did not withdraw from the Commonwealth until 1949, and that Northern Ireland is part of Great Britain. So you're really in a situation where you need to be sure you look in both English and Irish records, especially during almost all the period of time that you would be doing research, because in some cases the records may be in England, and in other cases they still may be entirely in Ireland. And another very important issue with the research in Ireland is complicated not only by the historic warfare, but by major famines. And we have a picture here on this slide of the famine statues in Dublin. And this is particularly focused on what they call the potato famine, and we'll look at that. The Great Famine, or the Irish Potato Famine, occurred from 1845 to 1849. My ancestors probably left Ireland right at the tail end of this time period. They were definitely in the United States by 1854, and may have, William Linton, my ancestor, may have arrived in 1852. So they could have left, and they came by way of Canada, by the way. They went to New Brunswick and then came down from New Brunswick to Philadelphia. So they could have possibly been there at the end of this tail end of the potato famine, but people basically were dying in the streets, and it was incredible. But over 1 million people died in this relatively small country, and another 1 million left the country. Many of those came to the United States, but they also went to Canada and even into South America. There are significant migrations into South America, and of course into other parts of the British Commonwealth, which would have been in Australia and New Zealand. So these were places where the Irish went when they were able to leave, and they weren't just dying. Now, another significant event in the history was during the War of Independence between Ireland and England. There was an event which occurred that the Public Records Office in Dublin was actually, it was not necessarily attacked. There's a little bit of controversy over what happened, but it was likely that ammunition and munitions were being stored in the building. Interestingly enough, this is where they had all their records, and the Public Record Office exploded. One of the things you're going to hear, and it's kind of one of those almost myths that you hear constantly in genealogy, and that is that many of the records were destroyed. But the important thing to understand is that many genealogically important records survived. It's important to understand when doing genealogical research in Ireland to have some kind of a reference material that tells you, and there are books and online sources and all sorts of records that I previously mentioned that I'll talk about in a moment. I'll have quite a list here of different sources. But what's important is to understand which records were destroyed in which counties and which records have survived, and what kinds of records may be helpful and did survive. There's some really other very important thing. Another important factor for people who are doing research from the United States into their Irish ancestors is to understand that notwithstanding all of these things that occurred, the potato famine and all of the other warfare that concerned, the Irish really in numbers began coming to America in about 1714. So a long time, more than 100 years earlier. So some of your Irish ancestors you may not find until you've done some pretty extensive research back generations, and then discover that that your people came over from Ireland in the early 1700s. So this is kind of this is another date that you might want to keep in mind as you're beginning and doing Irish research. And we estimate, it's estimated, obviously it's not an exact number, but they estimate that about 4.5 million Irish came to the United States, or America actually, between 1820 and 1930. So that would have been the United States. But we're including in America, we include Canada and any of the parts of Central South America and Mexico that may have also had been the destination of some of the Irish immigrants. But the bulk of these people came to the United States. The largest number of immigrants into the United States were the Germans, and that is, they outnumber everyone else considerably by a very high number. The second largest group were actually Irish, and English is actually down quite a ways now. If your English ancestors came to America, they came very early, but a lot more other people came to America than the English, even though we are primarily an English-speaking country. Important always, no matter where you're beginning your research, you probably will run into some immigrants from one country another. In Europe, the immigrants were probably, could be any of the countries that were driven out during wars and during different population migrations. But we always begin our immigrant research, for example, here in the United States or in Canada or wherever the immigrants arrived, at the place of the arrival, not the place of departure. It's very interesting here in the United States. What will commonly happen is that you'll see a census record, the U.S. Census record, beginning in about 1850, when they expanded the census to include all of the members of the family. The census records from then on generally ask for the place of origin of each individual in the family, where they were born, and then also ask for the place where, in many of the census records years, ask for the place where the parents were born, each of the parents, father and mother. And it's not unusual that this is the way that a beginning researcher will find out that whoever gave the census information indicated that their family came from Ireland. That's helpful to know that, but it's not very helpful. It gets you a place to start, but it certainly doesn't answer a lot of questions that we need to answer. And the most important of those is that we need to do further research where the people were living and where their descendants ended up living in order to find the exact location of where the person came from. So what do you need to know about your ancestors? And this is general speaking, and we're specifically today I'm talking about Ireland, but it would be the same questions you would ask. You just fill in the blank of the place that your ancestors came from. It's very helpful to have a name. It's very helpful to have a full name. Looking for someone named Andrew or Edward is not very helpful. So you just really need to spend a real effort to discover what this person's name was. It's also important to know, in order to connect the person to Ireland, you need a date of some event in the ancestor's life in Ireland. You can't just guess and say, well, he must have gotten here by the 1800s. Well, if you have 100 years worth of records to look for, and all you know is they got here in the 1800s, then it's not going to be a realistic way to do the research. So doing more research here will give you basically a window of time. Fortunately, in the United States, the census records, U.S. Census records, have for a number of the years in the 1800s and so forth, they would tell the date of arrival in the United States and whether or not the person became a naturalized citizen. And those two numbers of the date of the naturalization or fact of naturalization and the date of arrival give you a beginning start. at finding your Irish ancestor. Now, this is the key, and this is the difficult, for me turned out to be exceptionally difficult, was finding the place where my ancestor lived in Ireland. And you need to find where your ancestor lived, and that includes the parish, the town, and the county. You really need to get it down to a very small geographic area, or a village, even if there's more than one village in the parish, so that you don't run into the common problem, which is that you have people in the same area with the same name, exactly the same name, and even have spouses with the same names and children with the same name. So it just becomes very difficult without discovering the information. And this is the trick. And in my case, I had my great-grandmother was a genealogist, and she did extensive research during her lifetime with gathering thousands and thousands of names of her ancestors and other people. She wasn't very discriminating. She mostly did what you would today call surname searching. So she would pick up any of the Lintons. She was a Linton, and she would pick up any of the Lintons any place and hoping that somehow she could connect them with her family lines. Obviously, that didn't work very well, but she did have a large number of people that were found over the years. If any of you are interested in that particular group of thousands and thousands of names, those names are all presently, many of them are on MyHeritage in my family trees, and also in a family tree on FamilySearch. Oh, and my family trees on Ancestry, etc. So yes, but a huge number of them are on my family tree. Now, so the key there was the place, and what happened was my great-grandmother, is she recorded the place where her father, Samuel Linton, who was the immigrant, was born. The only problem is that she did not get it correct, and so there was no such place. Years of research and going through gazetteers and maps and lists of all the place names and all of the different resources could not in any way establish where my great-grandfather was born, a great-great-grandfather. And so basically I did research in the United States, and eventually in a church record I found where he himself had recorded where he was born, and that cleared that up. Unfortunately, there haven't been any records available from that place, but that was at least got part of it done. Now, and another very, very important aspect of what you need to know is religion. There is a definite separation in Ireland between the various religions. And so what you want to know is whether they were Protestants, and if they were primarily Presbyterian. For example, the Scottish were primarily Presbyterian, and the English were Church of England, or if we call them in the United States, Episcopalians. And so that's one thing, but the body of a majority of the people, vast majority of the people in Ireland itself, of the native Irish, were Catholics. And so you only have three categories, basically: Protestant, Catholic, and unknown. And if you don't know, it's going to be, that isn't impossible. It just means you have to spend a lot more time looking at all the records, both Protestant and Catholic records, in order to understand where these people came from. One of the big things back when I was a lot younger, the news, national news, international news, always was talking about, almost constantly, about the warfare and problems, terrorism problems that were going on between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland, the Free Irish part. And they were also very, very, very much determined by the Protestants for the Northern Irish and the Catholics in the Irish country. So it was not only a political fight, it was a religious fight. And it was quite that went on for many years. It's been a while since we've had any really major things go on in Ireland, but there's still a very strong group of people who are very, very, very involved in trying to either unify Ireland or to maintain the separation. So there's still two sides to that, very much. Okay, so we look at Ireland, and what we see is, and this is a pretty good map because it shows you the counties, the different counties as they were, and understanding that what I said a moment ago, that the most important thing that you're going to find and what you should focus on before any other research concerns is the location of an event. You need to be exact. Too many times when we look at entries in online family trees, we see people putting in things like a person was born in a state in the United States, that they put just Kansas as the place, or they'll put England, or they'll put Germany, or they'll put Ireland. And those are absolutely not helpful, and it does not give anyone who looks at that kind of an entry any confidence that the entry is accurate. So once again, location is it's the second most important, and it is the third most important. There is really nothing else that you can focus on more that will help you to straighten out and understand where the record sets are. There's a very simple rule, a very simple definition of genealogically relevant records, and records that are significant or genealogically relevant are records that were created by someone who either witnessed the event or had a duty to report the event. And it doesn't necessarily have a direct connection with the time of the event, but we need to make sure that the record was created by someone who may have had the actual information, so that it wasn't a copy of or what part of the information that isn't as reliable. Okay, well, now we're going to get into some of the resources that we need to know about. First of all, this is a glossary and distribution map. It's a database of Irish place names. And so what you have here is a map where you can go on and get the English version and the Irish version of each of the places in the country, if there are. Some places, there's not necessarily a difference between the Irish and the English, but in a lot of places, the Irish name is very much so. And you can see on this slide, there's a place name of the day, and it says that there are two different ways. And the English here is a rough kind of made up word that sort of sounds like what the Irish name sounds like. So you can see a little bit of how if you could understand how the English was said years ago, which would have been different than it is today, and you would have some idea of what the Irish sounded like years ago. But Irish is still an active language. People still go to school and use language and speak Irish, and so it is a very alive language today. And and Ireland is a bilingual country. There are several bilingual countries out there. Here's the address of that particular website. I think it's very helpful to have a place names where you can get into all of the information out there. And here, for example, this was the place where ultimately I discovered that my ancestors were from. It was Mulvin, and it says that's the English word for it, but the Irish name hasn't been confirmed. That means we're not really sure. It's such a, well, actually, it's a really obscure place out in the middle of, really out in the middle of the farmland. But you can see here the county names have two Irish, right over here on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see that Irish names and the English names for the civil parish and the county. And interestingly enough, the information that we had about their civil parish, that Ardstraw, was correct. It wasn't that far off. It's just that the townland itself, where the church was not correctly related. And we couldn't find records in Ardstraw at all. So there it is. That was the place, that little yellow dot on the screen. Here's my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, and he was born in Tyrone, in Mulvin in County Tyrone. And he died here in the United States, here in Utah. And so you can see this. I'll blow this up so you can see exactly how those the names are. The question's always asked when you go to a forum: does it help you to do research in Ireland to know Irish? The answer is yes. But as genealogists, we can usually get by with learning just some of the terms, but we always have to come to grips with the issue of the place names. So whether you're doing research here in Scandinavia or wherever, in Germany, France, or Italy, or wherever, it really helps to know some of the language, a little bit enough to be able to read the records and not make some mistakes in the people that are named in the records, so you know exactly whether it's saying they're that they were born here or they were born somewhere else. The record sets in Ireland are divided into two major divisions based on 1864, and 1864 has is meaningful because of some reasons that I'll get to in just a moment. But before 1864, there are the vital records are the church records. So the primary source for records are church records, period, church. And that means Catholic Church records and Presbyterian or Protestant records. So those two record sets. And there are surprisingly quite a few of these records, and this is where you can do a lot of research. Also, there are census fragments, and the reason why there are census fragments is because of the constant warfare and also the destruction of the original copies of some of the census records in that explosion back in 1922. Civil registration, and for Protestant marriages from 1845 to 1863. You'll see this happening with a lot of records, is that there'll be a record set, and inevitably it seems to me like your ancestor never falls in that middle of the record set, but that's just something we get used to in genealogy. And Griffiths valuations, I'll explain that in just a second. And tithe records and other land registration records. Tithe records, some of us would associate those with the church, and actually that is partially where this came from, understanding that in both cases, the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches were the government-sponsored church organization, and so taxing some of the tax revenue that were captured by the government also went to support the churches. So a tithe record was a land record, and one of the more valuable records that have come through in fairly not complete, but for certain years, are the tithe records, which actually go down to each individual parcel of land. So you can find out who owned every little farm and land peace in the country through the existing tithe records, and cemeteries also. Obviously, there are a lot of cemeteries and cemetery records. Unfortunately, the climate in Ireland is rather wet, a lot damper than here, and cemeteries do suffer. This is now the Griffins Registration, so that's explaining this. This was between 1848 and 1864, and it was basically a land tax, a real estate tax, to determine the liability to pay the poor rate. Now, the poor rate was what they used to support the poor and the destitute, and they had what are called poor law unions and poor houses that they established in England. And this was primarily an English movement that was imposed on Ireland. But it gives detailed information where the people lived during that time period. Obviously, before, they didn't suddenly buy the land in 1848. Maybe some did, but they didn't get on the land in 1848. They probably owned it before and after. So this is quite a useful particular document. Now we look at kind of the records after 64, and the main one of those, and the reason why this exists, this date exists, is because of civil registration, because that's when it began. It began a little bit earlier than that in the 1850s in England, but it was pretty uniform after 1864 in Ireland. So regardless, Northern Ireland, Southern Irish, whatever, this was back when it was all being ruled by England. And then the census records after this period of time, many of which survive because they were copied into English records. Will and probate records also begin to become important after 1864, and newspapers. You may never have thought of that as a good source, but they still had newspapers, and a lot of the newspapers from this period have been preserved and digitized, by the way. And of course, we're back to cemetery records, which became very important. Just a note here that MyHeritage has a substantial Irish collection, which Esther mentioned is free for another day for access. And they have almost 14 million when this slide was made, they had about 14 million records, including the Griffiths valuations. And some of the passengers arriving in New York from Ireland and other records. So these are important records, and there's quite a list of them here. You can look, there are 110 collections at this time. And the reason I qualify any time that I have a slide from MyHeritage is that they have a very aggressive record acquisition project or whatever in the company, and the number of records goes up constantly. They're always acquiring new, very large and very important sets of records. So this is the total. At the time there were 13, just almost 14 million records in 110 collections. You also need to know about the MyHeritage knowledge base. That's https education.myheritage.com, and this is where a lot of these presentations and the webinars and other things that they are involved in, their educational films, videos, they're being gathered here into this huge, now becoming a very huge collection. It's only a couple of years old, but it is a very, very valuable website for doing research. Just a note here to look online and on the family tree database websites. There obviously, there are a couple of other websites, big websites out there that have significant British and Irish records, and that's Find My Past and FamilySearch. And there are some other record sets and large record sets in Ireland, and we'll get into those. One of the ways to, one of the explanations in quite amount of detail of how to find the Ireland place of origin is on the FamilySearch Research Wiki. And that's familysearch.org, and then the link is to the Research Wiki, and you simply look for Ireland and get all of the information that's there available in Ireland, and links out to MyHeritage and all the other websites that have Irish records. Another place that you should be very well acquainted with is the National Archives of Ireland. And they have, as you can see, if you look, if it's visible on your screen, down sort of in the lower middle, you'll see they actually have a genealogy section of the National Archives dedicated to telling you how to research your family history and what the sources are. And they have a free genealogy advisory service. And they also have free census access, the 1901 and 1911 censuses on the National Archives. So I'm going to emphasize that. This is what's available for some of the records. They have 1901 to 1911 census, the 1820s and 1830s for the Republic of Ireland, the allotment books, tithe allotment books. The word allotment means that's how much they were assessed. You might call them tithe assessment books, but that's the old word for it, allotment. And 1820s and 1830s, and then the Republic of Ireland and will calendars. A will calendar is a list of all of the wills that were being processed by the courts. And they have those from 1858 to 1920, and then from 1922 to 1982. And then for the Republic of Ireland only, 1918, from 1918. Those are all free on that, available online on the free website from the National Archives of Ireland. So that's a good resource. And then there's irishgenealogy.ie. There's a number of records here. We're getting close to the end, so I'll kind of move through these. And these websites, they have a lot of the records available. Church records, civil records, a lot of useful links and ways to get research help. For the Catholic parishes, this is important for understanding where to find the Catholic records. Many of those would be left and still be in the churches, in the individual parish churches. So the National Library of Ireland Catholic Parish Registers is, and this is the address, is registers.nli.ie. And they have a map of all of the larger Catholic dioceses and parishes. And this is what a parish maps looks like when you take the larger, the counties, and you divide them up into the parishes. So you can zoom in on these on the map and see where all these parishes are. The importance of these maps is simple. If your people came from one county, you need to make sure, or one parish, you need to make sure you search all the surrounding parishes, because they might have traveled just a few miles to get married or to have a baby baptized. The GRO is for Northern Ireland, and it's called NI Direct. And that is the General Register Office for Northern Ireland. And if you're not acquainted with this, it's very important to become acquainted, because many of the records that you find will be in indexes. And then in order to obtain an original copy of the record, or the original record copy, you have to pay for it through the General Register Office. So that's what happens in England and in Northern Ireland. I'm not going to go through each of these. I'm just listing a number of the types of records. This is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, called PRONI, and it is the official archive for Northern Ireland. And this is where they have these records. So doing research, if you find that your people came from Northern Ireland, you should be acquainted with PRONI and which records are there. There's also the Ulster Historical Foundation. This is a very important website and they have research services and family history classes, online classes that you can take. One of my daughters, is presently working on a master's degree through a Scottish university, and she lives in Pennsylvania. So this is possible that you could get into a degree area with it. So this is ancestryireland.com. I just summarized, there are many other useful websites, so learn about the history and records that are available. And even if you know exactly where your ancestors lived, I'm going to have to say you ultimately may need to go to Ireland to do more research. It's just the way it ends up happening, that you may end up finding out exactly where they live, but you can't get the records. And the only way you could do it would be to go knock on the doors and talk to people and or contact the priest at the church or whatever. Okay, well, thanks for watching. That's hopefully that was helpful in understanding a little bit of the background and where you might be able to get going to find all these people over there.
Thank you, James. That was very, very thorough, and I think it gives us all a little more background, especially for those of us with Irish roots who just might not know all the history behind everything that you told us about. So really, thank you so much for such a, and I see here Jennifer wrote exactly what I was thinking. She said, James, this has been such an impressive, informative session. Thank you for taking your time today to discuss everything with us here. I learned so much. Thank you, Jennifer. That's exactly what I was thinking. Kyla wrote, thank you. Learned a lot, especially about parish record information. So I think it was just so useful and helpful for all of our audience. And if it's okay with you, James, we'll take a few questions now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So let's see what we have. Shelley asks, do you have any understanding of the genealogy of Irish travelers? And were there any Scottish or English or Welsh travelers?
The term travelers is usually applied to two different classes of people. One were people who were, by their occupation, were travelers, meaning people who were involved in shipping or were involved in the fairs. When you talk about a fair, you mean every little village would have a fair, and that they would have people traveling between those various fairs. But the other meaning for travelers was applied to the gypsy or the Roni. And the gypsy people were often termed travelers. I have one of my ancestral lines where the people were called travelers, and we strongly suspect that they were gypsies. And the gypsies have their own particular challenging area of doing genealogy. They're very it's really kind of interesting because not only did they travel around, the two sisters who were in that particular, when they got married, both of them understated their age by 20 years, exactly 20 years, and both of them did exactly the same thing. So this kind of the problem with gypsies is that they were very secretive about their ages and their actual background. For obvious reasons, they were extremely persecuted all over Europe. They were just never at rest.
Wow, very interesting. I see Lloyd here says, my great-grandfather was a corn merchant and called a traveler, kind of a third meaning.
Yeah, well, merchants, anybody who had to travel back and forth between an area, like, doing merchandise, sometimes were classified as travelers. But you should also look for the back meaning, because that could imply that he was also a gypsy.
Jennifer says, never ask a woman their age.
Well, in this case, it was pretty obvious that they were off.
20 years. What a
If you're going
difference.
to say 20 years, that's going to be hard to support.
So ladies, you can get away with 20 years off your age.
Maybe.
We have a question here from Jennifer. She asks, James, if someone wasn't listed as Catholic, would that mean that they may instead have been from England?
Yes. Very quickly, that's the answer to that. If you can't find them in the Catholic registers, they were probably either from England. Yeah, I mean, there weren't a lot of other people running around in Ireland besides the English. Yeah.
Okay. Mary Jo asks, are there variations of the family name Theory that I should also look for?
Probably 100. The problem is this, and what I've always speculated about my great grandmother and her father, where she probably could not understand him at all, because he was directly from Ireland, and she had been born and raised in the United States, so she probably had a really difficult time understanding and transliterating any kind of things he said. And when somebody came to the United States or moved around and they had a name like that, they could have been spelled dozens of ways. So you just have to be real inventive sometimes.
And just keep searching.
Yeah, just keep searching.
Okay. Martin asked, I was asked a few years ago by an Irishman if there were any good books on the Irish in America. I had to reply that I hadn't read any. Does anyone have any recommendations?
Well, there are a lot of reference books. Irish to America is probably the title of one of the books that's really good that I've reused in the past. There's a book that talks about the Scotch Irish in America, and that's a book called Albion's Seed, SEED, like the seed in the ground. Albion is the traditional name of Great Britain. And so that's a very, very good book. It helps you understand all of the immigrants to America. There's just a whole libraries of books. If you went on to what's called WorldCat, which is the catalog of all of billions of books and records, and do Ireland and a search for Irish history, you're going to find thousands and thousands of books. So.
Okay, great. That's all the time that we have for the questions. Okay. So James will give away now one complete plan to somebody who left a comment or a question for you. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone, we are giving away 5 complete plans on MyHeritage for the Deep Nostalgia Challenge, as I mentioned earlier. So if you don't win today, don't worry, you have many more chances. So we suggest that you go and animate old family photos and upload them to social media or send them to us by email. You can look in the comments here. We put up a link to all the information about the Deep Nostalgia Challenge. And we hope to see lots of entries from today from all of our viewers here for more opportunities to win a MyHeritage Complete Plan. Just to remind you, the Complete Plan will give you unlimited access to 13 billion historical records on MyHeritage, including all the Irish records that we have. So they won't just be free till tomorrow, they'll be free for the whole length of the Complete Plan and all our other records on MyHeritage. It will give you unlimited family tree size and unlimited access to all of our photo tools on MyHeritage. So that's MyHeritage in color, the MyHeritage photo enhancer, and the new Deep Nostalgia tool. You'll have unlimited access. So one winner today, right now, that we'll be giving away, but also 5 winners at the end of the Deep Nostalgia Challenge. So definitely check it out, and we'd love to see your entries and what they mean to you, and a little bit about the people behind the photos, because we love those stories. So please send them in. So today's winner today, James, we got a lot of great comments here and entries and questions for you. But the winner today is Kyla Cabral, and Kyla wrote to us, and she said, "My mother always took pride in our Irish heritage, but little did I know there is quite a lot on my father's side as well. Turns out I am mostly Irish. I am trying to break through the barriers. My third great-grandmother, Jane Anderson Longshaw, was born in Ireland, moved to England, and came to America for a better life. Her story has been nothing short than complicated, and I'm working on unraveling her story for my genealogy blog. I'm so excited to learn more about Irish genealogy." So lovely comment there, Kyla, and congratulations on your win. We'll be in touch with you through private message to claim your prize. And it sounds like she was an incredible person, your third great grandmother. We'd love to see her photo animated if you have a photo of her. So
Actually,
let us know.
Yeah, actually, she was a professional photographer, and she has thousands of photos. And some of them, a lot of them are up on MyHeritage, by the way.
Oh, really? Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. We love good photos at MyHeritage. You know that, James.
Yeah.
So a couple questions here about how you can rewatch today's session because it was so informative and so helpful. So just to remind you all, on MyHeritage's Facebook page, facebook.com/MyHeritage, under the video section, you can find today's session. You could rewatch it. I know James included lots of information, a lot of links, so feel free to go and rewatch it and write everything down and take notes, as well as all of our previous sessions. So James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Just one last note. I do know the difference between Scotch and Scottish, and I know that people are Scottish and they aren't Scotch. But unfortunately, I come from a small town in eastern Arizona, and I have never overcome my, whatever you want to call it, colloquial way of speaking. So I'm sorry, and I have an excuse.
No excuse necessary. And thank you so much. I think we all learned so much today about Irish family history, which is so fitting. And happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye.